Thoughts Are Things by Prentice Mulford. Chapter 1. The Material Mind versus the Spiritual Mind. There belongs to every human being a higher self and a lower self, a self or mind of the spirit which has been growing for ages, and a self of the body which is but a thing of yesterday. The higher self is full of prompting idea, suggestion, and aspiration. This it receives of the Supreme Power. All this the lower or animal self regards as wild and visionary. The higher self argues possibilities and power for us greater than men and women now possess and enjoy. The lower self says we can only live and exist as men and women have lived and existed before us. The higher self craves freedom from the cumbersomes, the limitations, the pains and disabilities of the body. The lower self says that we are born to them, born to ill, born to suffer, and must suffer, as have so many before us. The higher self wants a standard for right and wrong of its own. The lower self says we must accept a standard made for us by others, by general and long-held opinion, belief, and prejudice. To thine own self be true, is an oft-uttered adage. But to which self? The higher or the lower? You have in a sense two minds, the mind of the body and the mind of the spirit. Spirit is a force and a mystery. All we know, or may ever know, of it is that it does exist, and is ever working and producing all results in physical things seen of the physical sense, and many more not so seen. What is seen of any object, a tree, an animal, a stone, a man, is only a part of that tree, animal, stone, or man. There is a force which for a time binds such objects together in the form you see them. That force is always acting on them to a greater or lesser degree. It builds up the flower to its fullest maturity. Its cessation to act on the flower or tree causes what we call decay. It is constantly changing the shape of all forms of what we call organized matter. Any animal, plant, or human being are not in physical shape this month or this year what they will be next month or next year. This ever-acting, ever-varying force which lies behind and, in a sense, creates all forms of matter we call spirit. To see, reason, and judge of life and things in the knowledge of this force makes what is termed the spiritual mind. We have thorough knowledge of the wonderful power of using or directing this force, when we recognize it, and know that it exists so as to bring us health, happiness, and eternal peace of mind. Composed as we are of this force, we are ever attracting more of it to us and making it a part of our being. With more of this force must come more and more knowledge. At first in our physical existence we allow it to work blindly. Then we are in ignorance of that condition known as the material mind. But as mind, through its growth or increase of this power, becomes more and more awakened, it asks, why comes so much of pain, grief, and disappointment in the physical life? Why do we seem born to suffer and decay? That question is the first awakening cry of the spiritual mind, and an earnest question or demand for knowledge must in time be answered. The material mind is a part of yourself, which has been appropriated by the body and educated by the body. It is as if you taught a child that the wheels of a steamboat made the boat move, and said nothing of the steam, which gives the real power. Bred in such ignorance, the child, should the wheels stop moving, would look no further for the cause of their stoppage than to try to find where to repair them, very much as now so many depend entirely on repair of the physical body to ensure its healthy, vigorous movement, never dreaming that the imperfection lies in the real motive power, the mind. The mind of the body, or material mind, thinks and judges entirely from the material or physical standpoint. It sees in your own body all there is of you. The spiritual mind sees the body as an instrument for the mind or real self to use in dealing with material things. The material mind sees in death of the body an end to all there is to you. The spiritual mind sees in death of the body only the falling off from the spirit of a worn-out instrument. It knows that you exist as before, only invisible to the physical eye. The material mind sees your physical strength as coming entirely from your muscles and sinews, and not from source without your body. It sees in such persuasive power as you may have with tongue or pen the only force you possess for dealing with people to accomplish results. The spiritual mind will know in time that your thought influences people for or against your interests, though their bodies are thousands of miles distant. The material mind does not regard its thought as an actual element, as real as air or water. The spiritual mind knows that every one of its 1,000 daily secrets are real things, acting on the mind of the persons they are sent to. The spiritual mind knows that matter or material is only an expression of spirit or force, that such matter is ever changing in accordance with the spirit that makes or externalizes itself in the form we call matter, and therefore, if the thought of health, strength, and rejuvenation is constantly held to in mind, such thought of health, strength, and rejuvenation will express itself in the body, making maturity never ceasing, vigor never ending, and the keenness of every physical sense ever increasing. The material mind thinks matter, or that which is known by our physical senses, to be the largest part of what exists. The spiritual mind regards matter as the coarser or cruder expression of spirit and the smallest part of what really exists. The material mind is made sad at the contemplation of decay. The spiritual mind attaches little importance to decay, knowing in such decay that spirit, or the moving force in all things, is simply taking the dead body or the rotten tree to pieces, and then will build them up again, as before, temporarily into some other new physical form of life and beauty. The mind of the body thinks that its physical senses of seeing, hearing, and feeling constitute all the senses you possess. The higher mind, or mind of the spirit, knows that it possesses other senses akin to those of physical sight and hearing, but more powerful and far-reaching. The mind of the body has been variously termed the material mind, the mortal mind, and the carnal mind. All these refer to the same mind, or in other words, to that part of your real self which has been educated in error by the body. If you had been born and bred entirely among people who believed that the earth was a flat surface and did not revolve around the sun, you would in early years of your physical growth believe as they did. Exactly in such fashion do you, in your earlier years, absorb the thought and belief of those nearest you, who think that the body is all that there is, and judge everything by its physical interpretation to them. This makes your material mind. The material mind, seeing what seems to it, depth, dissolution, and decay in all human organization, and ignorant of the fact that the real self or intelligence has in such seeming death only cast off a worn-out envelope, thinks that decay and death is the ultimate of all humanity. For such reason it cannot avoid a gloom or sadness coming of such error, which now pervades so much of human life at present. One result or reaction from such gloom born of hopelessness is a reckless spirit for getting every possible gratification and pleasure, regardless of right and justice, so long as the present body lasts. This is a great mistake. All pleasure so gained cannot be lasting. It brings besides 100-fold more misery and disappointment. The spiritual mind teaches that pleasure is the great aim of existence, but it points out ways and means for gaining lasting happiness other than those coming of the teaching of the material world. The spiritual mind, or mind open to higher and newer forces of life, teaches that there is a law regulating the exercise of every physical sense. When we learn and follow this law, our gratifications and possessions do not prove sources of greater pain than happiness, as they do to so many. By the spiritual mind is meant a clearer mental sight of things and forces existing both in us and the universe, and of which the race, for the most part, has been in total ignorance. We have now but a glimpse of these forces, those of some being relatively a little clearer than those of others, But enough has been shown to convince a few that the real and existing causes for humanity's sickness, sorrow, and disappointment have not in the past been seen at all. In other words, the race has been as children, fancying that the miller inside was turning the arms of the windmill, because some person has told them, so taught they would remain in total ignorance that the wind was the motive power. This illustration is not at all an overdrawn picture of the existing ignorance which rejects the idea that thought is an element all about us, as plentiful as air, and that is blindly directed by individuals and masses of individuals in the domain of material mind or ignorance. It is turning the windmill's arms, sometimes in one direction, sometimes in another, sometimes with good and sometimes with evil results. A suit of clothes is not the body that wears such suit. Yet the material mind reasons very much in this way. It knows of no such thing as clothing for the spirit, for it does not know that body and spirit are two distinct things. It reasons that the suit of clothing, the body, is all there is of the man or woman. When that man or woman tumbles to pieces through weakness, it only sees the suit of clothes so going to pieces, and all its efforts to make that man or woman stronger are put on the suit instead of making effort to reinforce the power within that has made the suit. There are probably no two individuals precisely alike as regards to the relative condition or action on them of their material and spiritual minds. With some, the spirit seems not all that awakened. With others, it has begun to stretch and rub its eyes as a person does on physical awakening, when everything still appears vague and indistinct. Others are more fully awakened. They feel to a greater or lesser extent that there are forces belonging to them before unthought of. It is with such that the struggle for mastery between the material and spiritual mind is likely to be most severe, and such struggle for a time is likely to be accomplished by physical disturbance, pain, or lack of ease. The material mind is, until won over and convinced of the truths, constantly received by the spiritual mind at war and in opposition to it. The ignorant part of yourself dislikes very much to give up its long accustomed habits of thinking. It costs a struggle in any case, at first, to own that we may have been mistaken and give up views long held to. The material mind wants to move on in a rut of life and idea, as it has always done, and as thousands are now doing. It dislikes change more and more as the crust of the old thought held from year to year grows more thickly over it. It wants to live on in the house it has inhabited for years, dress in the fashion of the past, go to business and return year in and out at precisely the same hour. It rejects and despises, after a certain age, the idea of learning any new accomplishments, such as painting or music, whose greatest use is to divert the mind, to rest it, and to enable you to live in other departments of being. All this being apart from the pleasure it also gives you, as the mind or spirit teaches the body more and more skill and expertise in the art you pursue. The material mind sees as the principal use of any art only a means to bring money, and not in such art a means for giving variety to life, dispelling weariness, resting that portion of the mind devoted to other business, improving health and increasing vigor of mind and body. It holds to the idea of being too old to learn. This is the condition of so many persons who have arrived at or are past middle age. They want to settle down. They accept as inevitable the idea of growing old. Their material mind tells them that their bodies must gradually weaken, shrink from the fullness and proportion of youth, decay, and finally die. Material minds say that this has always been, and therefore always must be. They accept it wholly. They say quite unconsciously, it must be. To say a thing must be is the very power that makes it. The material mind then sees the body ever as gradually decaying, even though it dislikes the picture and puts it out of sight as much as possible. But the idea will reoccur from time to time, as suggested by the death of their contemporaries, and as it does they think must, and in that state of mind, indicated by the word must, will inevitably bring material results in decay. The spiritual or more enlightened mind says, if you would help to drive away sickness, Turn your thought as much as you can on health, strength, and vigor, and on strong, healthy, vigorous material things, such as moving clouds, fresh breezes, the cascade, the ocean surge, on woodland scenes and growing healthy trees, on birds full of life and motion. For in so doing, you turn on yourself a real current, or this healthy, life-giving thought, which is suggested and brought you by the thought of such vigorous, strong material objects. And above all, try to rely and trust that supreme power which formed all these things and far more, and which is the endless and inexhaustible part of your higher self or spiritual mind. As your faith increases in this power, so will your own power ever increase. Nonsense, says the ultra-material mind. If my body is sick, I must have something done to cure that body with things I can see and feel, and that is the only thing to be done. As for thinking, it makes no difference what I think, sick or well. At present, in such a case, a mind whose sense of these truths new to it has just commenced to be awakened, will, in many cases, allow itself to be for a time overpowered and ridiculed out of such an idea by its own material mind or uneducated part of itself, and in this it is very likely to be assisted by other material minds who have not yet woke up at all to these truths, and who are temporarily all the stronger through the positiveness of ignorance. There are people who cannot see as far ahead as one may see with a telescope, and who may be perfectly honest in their disbelief regarding what the person with the telescope does see. Though such people do not speak a word or argue against the belief of the partly awakened mind, still their thoughts act on such a mind, as a bar or blind to these glimpses of the truth. But when the spiritual mind has commenced to awaken, nothing can stop its further awakening, though the material mind for a time may retard it. Your real self may not at times be where your body is, says the spiritual mind. It is where your mind is, in the store, the office, the workshop, or with some person to whom you are strongly attached. And all of these may be in towns or cities far from where your body resides. Your real self moves with inconceivable rapidity as your thought moves. Nonsense, says your material mind. I am whatever my body is and nowhere else. Many a thought or idea that you reject as visionary or as a whim or fancy comes of the prompting of your